The town square incident. The sun was sinking low over the quiet town of Clay Ridge, casting long orange shadows across the cobblestone streets and warming the faded bricks of old storefronts. It was the kind of evening where time seemed to slow, where children laughed as they chased each other down the sidewalks, and old men leaned back in their rocking chairs to share stories of better days. The town had always been a peaceful one, but sometimes even peace can be broken in the blink of an eye. On this particular Saturday evening, the town square was unusually crowded. It was market day, and stalls lined both sides of the street, bursting with the colors of fresh fruit, handcrafted jewelry, homemade candles, and bundles of sunflowers. A local band played soft tunes near the fountain, and the scent of grilled corn and cinnamon pastries filled the air. Everything felt alive and beautiful, until the sound of roaring engines shattered the calm. 3 bikes stormed into the square with a thunder that turned every head. They weren't part of any local club. Their jackets bore no emblems. They looked young, reckless, and too loud for a place that treasured silence. The riders were rough-faced men in their 20s, tattoos crawling up their necks, laughter sharp and wild. They parked right in the center of the market, cutting off foot traffic as if it belonged to them. One of them even knocked over a display of wind chimes without glancing back. Vendors exchanged nervous glances. Parents pulled their children closer. Among the onlookers was a girl named Lucy. She was barely 21, small in stature, but strong in spirit, with a long scar running along her left arm from an accident she never liked talking about. She worked at a small flower shop nearby and had just finished her shift. Wearing a simple summer dress with sunflowers on it, she strolled through the market hoping to buy something sweet for her grandmother. But fate had different plans. The biker's eyes landed on her almost immediately. Maybe it was the way her hair caught the sunlight. Maybe it was the innocence in her walk, or how out of place she seemed compared to their rowdy presence. They whispered something among themselves and laughed. One of them nudged another and said something loud enough for Lucy to hear. She froze, not sure whether to ignore it or walk faster. Before she could react, one of the bikers stepped in front of her, blocking her path. Another circled behind. "Hey, sweetheart," the taller one said, his breath thick with the stench of cheap beer. "That's a pretty dress. Mind giving us a little twirl?" Lucy's eyes widened. She looked around, hoping someone would step in, but most people had either turned away or pretended to be busy with their phones. She took a step back. Then came the moment that made her heart stop. The smallest of the 3, a wiry man with a snake tattoo on his cheek, moved with quick, shameless boldness. With a grin, he reached toward the hem of Lucy's dress and jokingly lifted it just slightly, enough to make her face flush with shame and fear. The laughter that followed wasn't just cruel, it was thunderous, and yet still, no one did anything. But then through the crowd, a figure moved. Keanu Reeves had been in town for only a few days. He was staying in a small inn on the edge of Clay Ridge, trying to disappear for a while, away from the noise and cameras. He had come to this place seeking peace, but what he found was something far more urgent. He had been sitting on a bench, not far from the scene, sipping a simple tea and watching the world pass by. The moment he saw what was happening, his demeanor changed entirely. He stood calmly but purposefully and began walking toward the bikers. His face didn't show anger. It showed focus. His eyes locked on the men, and in that instant, there was no mistaking the weight of his presence. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply walked up to them with a silence that carried more power than 100 voices. The tallest biker, still laughing, turned just as Keanu approached. "Hey, man," he said, chuckling. "We're just having a bit of fun. No harm done." Keanu didn't respond right away. He looked at Lucy, who was frozen, trembling, tears welling in her eyes. Then he turned to the man who had touched her dress. "That's not fun," Keanu said in a calm but firm tone. "That's humiliation. And you just did it in front of a crowd that chose to look away." The laughter stopped. The men stared at him, uncertain whether to laugh again or get serious. "Do you know who I am?" one of them asked, trying to regain control. "I don't care who you think you are, old man." Keanu took a slow step forward. "It's not about who I am," he said. "It's about who she is. And the fact that none of you saw her as a person, That's the problem. The biker clenched his jaw, but his posture shifted. The crowd, which had been quiet and watching from a distance, began to edge closer. Phones came out. Someone whispered, "Is that Keanu Reeves?" Others nodded slowly, recognition spreading like fire. The man who had lifted Lucy's skirt tried to laugh it off again. "You gonna make me apologize?" he smirked. Keanu tilted his head slightly. "No, I'm going to give you a choice. You walk away now, or you find out what happens when a man defends someone who's been wronged." His voice was soft, but in that softness was an iron strength that chilled the bikers. After a long pause, the tallest one raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fine. Whatever. We're out of here. Let's go." They turned to leave, but not before Keanu looked each one in the eye. The bikers roared their engines and peeled out of the square, their pride bruised, their laughter now hollow. Once they were gone, the silence that followed was thick with tension and awe. Keanu turned back to Lucy. He gently offered her his hand, not as a hero, but as a human being. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, barely able to speak. "Thank you," she whispered. He helped her sit by the bench, shielding her from the stares of the lingering crowd. And for a few minutes he simply stayed beside her, not asking questions, not pressing her to talk, just being there. But as Lucy slowly began to breathe again, as her hand stopped shaking, a shadow lingered beyond the edge of the market. Unseen by most, the smallest of the three bikers hadn't ridden far. He was parked down the alleyway, watching. His face was no longer smiling. It was stone cold, and his hand clenched something metal. The sun disappeared below the horizon, and danger, it seemed, hadn't left after all. Shadows that don't leave, the following morning brought a golden calm to Clay Ridge, as if the town was eager to bury the memory of the previous evening. But for Lucy, there was no forgetting. Her sleep had been restless, broken by flashes of mocking laughter and the sting of helplessness. She had never felt so exposed, not just physically, but emotionally. In a town she had called home her whole life, surrounded by people she thought would protect her, she had stood completely alone, until a stranger stepped forward and gave her safety without asking for anything in return. She didn't know much about Keanu Reeves beyond the movies, but what she experienced yesterday had nothing to do with cameras or fame. It was something real, something pure. Keanu himself had kept his distance that morning, not because he didn't care, but because he knew pain needed space. He had rented a small cottage tucked behind the old church, a quiet retreat away from the main road. That morning he made tea with his own hands, poured it slowly, and sat by the window, watching the birds flit between branches. His mind wasn't peaceful. It hadn't been for years. He had seen too much, lost too much, and no matter how many kind things people said about him, there was always a part of him that remained heavy and unspoken. But yesterday reminded him of something important, that no matter how broken the world seemed, there was always a moment to choose kindness, to defend what was right, even when others stayed silent. Down at the market, whispers of the incident spread like wildfire. Some praised Keanu, others criticized the bystanders, and a few even tried to downplay what had happened, calling it a misunderstood prank. But Lucy's tearful face had been captured on more than one phone, and it was too late to pretend nothing had happened. A few shopkeepers came to her with soft apologies, but they were late and hollow. Still, she nodded politely, even though her heart felt like a tightly wound knot. What she truly wanted was not pity. It was strength. By noon, she made her way to the edge of town. Clutching a small wrapped box of wildflowers, she walked slowly, glancing over her shoulder more than once. She hadn't told anyone, but last night after the incident, she was sure she saw someone lingering across the street from her apartment. She had closed the curtains quickly, trying to convince herself it was paranoia. But today, even the sun didn't feel as warm, and every shadow looked like a threat. When she finally reached the cottage, she hesitated at the gate. Her hand hovered, unsure whether to knock. Before she could decide, The door opened gently and Keanu stood there holding a book in one hand, his face as calm and grounded as the earth beneath their feet. He looked surprised, but not unkind. "Hey," he said softly, stepping aside. Lucy offered a faint smile and handed him the flowers. "These are for you. I grow them at my shop. It's not much, but I just wanted to say thank you properly." Keanu took them with care, as if they were made of glass. "They're beautiful," he said. "You didn't have to." "I know," she replied, and for the first time her voice didn't shake. He invited her in, and they sat on two old chairs near the window, the scent of tea and the fresh flowers filling the space. They didn't talk much at first. Sometimes silence is the most healing sound. But eventually, Lucy looked at him with a seriousness that was too heavy for someone so young. "Have you ever been humiliated?" she asked, her eyes not flinching. Keanu took a breath, his gaze steady. "Yes. Not the same way. But yes. It leaves a mark people don't see." Lucy nodded. "I keep thinking, what if you hadn't been there? What if no one ever stands up? Then we become a world full of people who only watch," he said. "And that's not a world worth living in." Her eyes welled again, but she didn't let the tears fall this time. Instead, she spoke about her past. The scar on her arm was from a fire in her home when she was 16. She had pulled her little brother out of the flames before anyone else had even noticed. No one called her a hero. No one offered therapy or comfort. Just silence, as if pretending it hadn't happened would erase the trauma. Since then, she had always felt like the background character in everyone else's life. But Keanu listened, not out of duty, but with full presence. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes, just sat with her story, holding its weight so she wouldn't have to carry it alone. And then came the knock. It was sharp, deliberate, and came not from the front door, but from the back. Keanu's brow furrowed, and he gently motioned Lucy to stay behind him as he approached the kitchen window. Peeking through the curtain, he saw nothing. No footsteps, no figures. Just an envelope left on the doorstep with a single word written across it in red ink. Soon. He stepped outside carefully, picked it up, and scanned the woods beyond the fence. Nothing. But the tension in the air felt unnatural. It clung to the skin like smoke before a fire. When he returned, Lucy saw his expression change. She didn't ask right away, but her body tensed instinctively. Keanu didn't lie. He handed her the envelope and let her read it herself. Her hands trembled as she held the paper. "It's one of them, isn't it?" she asked. Keanu nodded slowly. "Probably the one with the snake tattoo." Lucy took a deep breath, fighting the urge to crumble. "I knew he was watching me last night. I wasn't crazy." "You're not crazy," Keanu said firmly. "You're brave, and he's trying to make you afraid of that." She clenched her fists. "What do we do?" Keanu didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window again, as if measuring something, beyond what the eye could see. "We don't run," he said finally. "We don't let him turn your life into fear. But we're smart about it. We prepare, and we watch him back." Lucy's eyes widened. "You mean, you'll help me?" Keanu looked at her like the answer had been clear all along. "I'm already helping you," he said, "because this isn't just about a skirt or a biker. It's about the world we let grow around us, and it's time someone stopped letting weeds take over the garden." The rest of the day passed in cautious planning. Keanu helped her install a camera near her apartment window. They spoke to the sheriff, who seemed polite but reluctant to take action without more proof. Keanu didn't argue. He simply smiled and said, "Then we'll get proof." As night fell again, Lucy returned home. Her fear was still there, but so was something new. Resolve. And just as she was locking her door, she saw something that made her heart skip. A small, crumpled photo had been slid under the door. It was a printed image, a photo of her and Keanu, taken from across the market square the day before. Someone had been watching the whole time, and now they wanted her to know it. The picture under the door. Lucy stared at the photograph on the floor for a long time without touching it. The room felt suddenly colder, the silence around her pierced only by the faint ticking of the wall clock above her couch. It wasn't just any photo. It was proof that someone had been watching closely, standing hidden in the shadows, unnoticed by the crowd that day in the market square. The angle was perfect, as if taken by someone who had been planning this moment, as if she were part of a game she didn't sign up for. In the picture, Keanu stood with quiet strength beside her, and, though his presence had protected her in that instant, it was clear the person behind the lens hadn't been deterred by his warning. They had returned, and they wanted her to know that this was far from over. With trembling fingers, she finally picked it up, flipped it over, and found something that made her breath catch. 3 numbers scratched into the back. They weren't coordinates. They weren't a phone number. Just 3 digits written with the edge of a knife, it seemed. 137. They meant nothing to her. But her instincts whispered that someone was counting down. She didn't sleep that night. She kept the lights on, the doors locked, and the camera pointed toward her window. She tried to read, tried to distract herself with soft music, but her thoughts always returned to that photo. Her mind cycled through everything. Was she in danger, or was this just intimidation? Was this man just angry at being humiliated, or was there something more twisted underneath? By morning, the exhaustion in her eyes was as deep as the fear in her chest. Keanu arrived just after sunrise, holding a bag of fresh croissants and a thermos of tea. He didn't need to be told what had happened. The way Lucy opened the door, pale and weary, told him everything. She handed him the photograph without a word. He looked at it for a long moment, then carefully folded it and placed it into his pocket, as if to take the burden from her. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "You're not alone in this," he said gently. "We're going to face it together." They sat in her small living room, the soft morning light slipping through the blinds, casting quiet shadows across the floor. Lucy finally asked about the numbers. Keanu leaned forward, thoughtful. Could be a message, could be a threat, or it could be a time. First contact, then a warning, then the real plan. Lucy nodded slowly. "Like a pattern?" "Exactly," Keanu said. "And if he's leaving breadcrumbs, it means he's trying to control the story. We're going to make sure that story changes." Keanu made a call to someone he trusted, an old friend who had worked in digital forensics and security. By midday, they had a discreet tracking system set up at Lucy's front door, a small pinhole camera connected to a hidden recording unit. They installed another device inside her car. Then they visited nearby buildings and shops to ask for any surveillance footage from the previous night. Most refused, fearing trouble or retaliation. But one elderly tailor, Mr. Benson, who had known Lucy since she was a child, offered up his camera data without question. They watched the footage together in Keanu's cottage. The screen showed time-stamped events in black and white, moments, looping forward through hours of normalcy. Then, just after midnight, a shadow appeared. The man with the snake tattoo. He crept along the sidewalk across from Lucy's apartment, stopped at her door, looked around, then crouched to slide the photo underneath. He stood there for another minute, staring up at her window. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just stared, as if imagining her reaction in advance. "He's obsessed," Lucy whispered. Keanu nodded slowly. "But that also means he's predictable. He needs you to feel small, to make himself feel big." Lucy didn't respond. She just stared at the man frozen on the screen. "What if this is just the beginning?" she asked. "What if he's planning something worse?" Keanu turned toward her with a steady gaze. "Then we make sure he doesn't get to finish that plan." They decided to go public. Not through the news, not through the police. Those paths were too slow, too uncertain. Keanu suggested something stronger. Together, they recorded a short video in which Lucy told her story. She didn't name the man, didn't call for revenge. She simply described what had happened in the square, how it felt to be humiliated while others watched, and how silence can sometimes be the loudest violence. Keanu sat beside her, not as a celebrity, but as a man standing up for something right. He spoke softly but with power, urging viewers to remember their responsibility, not just to speak up but to stand up. They uploaded it to a private account and shared it with a few trusted friends. Within 12 hours, it spread beyond anything they expected. Messages poured in. Thousands of people, some from Clay Ridge, many from far beyond, wrote to Lucy, thanking her for her courage, apologizing for staying silent or sharing their own stories of being humiliated in public. The ripple effect had begun, and with it came a strange mixture of strength and exposure. But not everyone was supportive. Buried in the waves of encouragement were anonymous threats, ugly comments, and one chilling message sent directly to her inbox. Wrong move. 2 steps left. Keanu read the message over Lucy's shoulder. He said nothing at first, then quietly asked her if she recognized the phrasing. Lucy nodded, heart pounding. He said that before. When he stepped in front of me at the market, just before he tried to touch my dress, he said, "Take 2 steps left and show me that smile." Keanu's eyes darkened. He's playing games, trying to convince you he still has control. But he doesn't, Lucy said, with more fire than fear this time. Not anymore, Keanu smiled faintly. Good, because it's time we end this. They went to the sheriff again, this time with the video, the surveillance, the photo, and the inbox message. The sheriff, finally pushed into action by the rising public attention, agreed to open an investigation and promised increased patrols around Lucy's neighborhood. But Keanu knew it wouldn't be enough. Men like this didn't stop because of rules. They stopped because someone made them. The next day passed with tension hanging like fog. Lucy went back to work at the flower shop, determined not to let fear steal her routine. Keanu stayed nearby, keeping watch without hovering. He believed in her strength, but he also knew trauma had a way of creeping in when no one was looking. He could see it in her hands when they shook slightly while tying a ribbon, in her eyes when they drifted toward the window, and then it happened. Just after closing, as Lucy was locking up, a dark figure stepped out from behind a parked truck, the man with the snake tattoo. This time he didn't laugh. He didn't joke. He simply looked at her with eyes that carried something far more dangerous than arrogance. Pure resentment. "You made me famous," he said with venom. "But now, I'm going to make sure everyone remembers how this ends." Lucy froze, her heart in her throat. There were no customers around, no lights on in the nearby shops. The alley beside the store seemed like it stretched into another world. "You're not doing anything," came a calm voice behind her. "Keanu." He stepped between them like a wall of quiet fury. His tone didn't rise, but his presence grew taller, then the sky. "Walk away," he said to the man. But this time, the man didn't move. His hand went to his side, and in the fading light, Lucy saw the glint of something metallic. Keanu's hand subtly moved to his jacket pocket, not for a weapon, but for something more powerful. His phone, which was already recording. He had expected this. The moment the man lunged forward, Keanu shifted his body, drawing him away from Lucy. They collided near the alley, a flurry of motion and footsteps on gravel. Lucy screamed, and in the next breath everything changed. The breaking point, time did not slow down. It exploded. Gravel crunched under feet, shadows twisted in the dim alleyway light, and the world seemed to fracture into instinct, movement, and raw survival. Keanu Reeves didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, even as the man with the snake tattoo lunged at him with a switchblade clutched tightly in one hand. The blade gleamed under the streetlight, catching the reflection of Lucy's wide, terrified eyes as she stood frozen at the shop's entrance. Her breath locked in her throat like it had forgotten how to escape. She had never seen violence like this, never stood this close to real danger, not in her worst nightmares. Keanu wasn't a fighter looking for trouble, but he was a protector forged through a life of quiet battles and unseen wounds. His movements weren't flashy or theatrical like the films people watched him in. They were efficient, precise, grounded in real training and deeper resolve. He stepped to the side just as the blade came forward, grabbed the attacker's wrist, and with a swift movement disarmed him, the knife clattering to the ground. But the man didn't stop. He swung again with bare fists, a storm of rage and humiliation pulsing through every punch. Keanu blocked most of the blows, but one caught his jaw. Pain bloomed sharp and sudden, but it didn't break him. It fueled his focus. Lucy wanted to scream, to run, to do something other than watch, but her legs felt like stone. The alley around them had turned into a stage of truth. No camera crew, no background actors, just reality, raw and unforgiving. The attacker cursed, screaming about being ruined, about revenge, about making Lucy pay for what he called his public shame. And that was when it all became clear to her. This wasn't about a single moment in the market. It wasn't about a dress or a viral video. It was about power. About how some men can't stand being told no, can't handle the weight of being called out, can't survive without control. Keanu didn't answer the screaming man with words. He answered by holding the attacker down until he couldn't fight anymore. When the man collapsed to his knees, breathing heavy and bleeding from a scraped elbow, Keanu picked up the phone he had been recording with. He hadn't captured everything, but he had enough. Enough to show that the threats were real, that the violence wasn't a fabrication, that Lucy had been in real danger all along. Sirens howled in the distance, someone having called the police as the struggle reached its peak, and soon, red and blue lights painted the walls of the alley. Officers stormed the scene and handcuffed the man with the snake tattoo, reading him his rights as he spit insults and threats into the air. Lucy stood back, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, shaking, not from fear anymore, but from the emotional crash of survival. Keanu approached her slowly, his lip bloodied but his eyes calm. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer than the wind that passed between them. Lucy nodded, her throat too tight for words. The officers took their statements, this time listening carefully, no longer skeptical. The evidence was overwhelming. The video, the weapon, the messages, the stalking, it all painted a picture too sharp to ignore. They assured Lucy that charges would be filed immediately. They told Keanu his bravery might have prevented something far worse. But when the flashing lights faded and the alley was empty again, what remained wasn't victory. It was weight, the kind that settles into bones and memory. Lucy sat on the curb staring at the ground, and Keanu sat beside her. For a while, neither of them said a word. "Do you think he'll come back?" Lucy finally asked, her voice barely audible. Keanu looked toward the horizon, where dawn was just beginning to tease the edge of the sky. "Not him," he said. "But others might." "Why?" she whispered. "Because there will always be people who fear being exposed," he said. "People who see strength in others as a threat to their control. But we don't stop standing up because of them. We prepare, we support each other, and we fight smarter." Lucy looked at him, and for the first time since the incident in the market, she saw something beyond the kindness in his eyes. She saw history, pain, battle. A man who had lived through storms the world never saw, and who still chose to be gentle despite it all. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "You didn't even know me." Keanu smiled faintly. "I've seen too many people walk away when they should have stood still. I don't want to be one of them." Lucy leaned her head against her knees, letting the quiet fill her. And though the alley was still, the war inside her wasn't. Because survival isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of a new one. She knew now that healing wouldn't come overnight. But it would come. And it would come not because she was told to be strong, but because she had learned to define her own strength. Later that morning, news of the attack made its way through the town. People who had ignored the earlier whispers now had proof to digest, to confront, to reckon with. The sheriff held a press conference. Reporters gathered. The video Keanu had recorded was now part of an official investigation, and Lucy's voice was no longer just another online echo. It was evidence. The flower shop opened late that day, but when it did, something unexpected happened. A woman Lucy had never met came in and placed a single rose on the counter. "This is for you," she said, "for reminding us that silence isn't safety." Others followed. Neighbors, strangers, even former classmates who had drifted away over the years. They didn't come with pity. They came with presence. and in every flower laid down, Lucy found a piece of her courage stitched back together. Keanu watched from the back of the store, quietly blending into the background like he always did. He wasn't there for attention. He never had been. But Lucy caught his eye through the glass display, and for a brief moment she smiled. But peace wouldn't last long. That night, as Keanu walked back to his cottage, he found something waiting for him on the front steps. Not a threat, not a message, a package. Carefully wrapped, he picked it up and brought it inside, opening it slowly under the soft light of a desk lamp. Inside was an old photograph, a younger version of himself, long before the fame, long before the cameras. On the back, a note was taped. "You remember him, don't you?" "I do." "We're not done yet." As Keanu stared at it in silence, heart steady, mind racing. This wasn't just about Lucy anymore. Someone from his past had just stepped into the present. And they had no intention of walking away. Ghosts from yesterday, the walls of Keanu's cottage had never felt so quiet. The night outside was hushed, blanketed in stillness, but inside his mind, a storm was gathering. The old photograph in his hand wasn't just a memory, it was a wound. And the note attached to it wasn't just a threat, it was a resurrection. The man who signed the letter with just an initial, S, was someone he hadn't thought about in nearly 20 years. Someone he had buried deep beneath layers of distance. Charity work, films, and a life spent giving more than taking. Yet now that past had clawed its way back into his present, attaching itself to the incident with Lucy like a parasite hungry for chaos. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a connection, and it meant everything was far more calculated than they had realized. Keanu placed the photo down on the desk and sat back in the worn leather chair by the window. Moonlight spilled over the hills outside, casting long shadows across the trees. He tried to remember every detail about S, the last time they had spoken, the moment things had gone wrong. Back then, S had been a friend, a close one. They had trained together in a small dojo tucked away in Tokyo, where discipline and honor were taught with every breath. But S had always wanted more than mastery. He wanted recognition, fame, control. He had been charismatic, but there was a coldness in his eyes, a hunger that no praise could satisfy. Eventually, their paths had split. Keanu had walked away from that chapter of his life when it turned dark, when S had tried to use violence to earn respect instead of earn it through humility. They hadn't spoken since. But now, decades later, here was his name hidden behind a single letter, his shadow darkening a town that had already tasted enough fear. The next morning, Keanu didn't tell Lucy about the letter, not yet. She was still recovering from the emotional whiplash of the past few days. There were shadows under her eyes, and though she tried to return to her normal routine, he could see the strain behind her smile. Still, she was resilient. Every day, she opened the shop, watered the plants, arranged the flowers, and met the gaze of customers who once turned away. Her strength wasn't in pretending she was okay. It was in her decision to keep showing up even when she wasn't. While Lucy tended to the shop, Keanu returned to the market square, retracing every step from the day of the attack. Not to relive it, but to understand how S could have been watching. He checked rooftops, alleys, reflective glass. He talked to vendors quietly, listening for anything out of place. Most had seen nothing, but one man, an old bookseller named Harris, mentioned something odd. A week before the bikers had arrived, a stranger had come by asking strange questions about the town layout, security cameras, traffic patterns. He wore a scarf around his neck despite the heat and spoke with a soft, controlled voice that made Harris uncomfortable. Said he was a documentarian, Harris told Keanu. But there was nothing in his eyes, not curiosity, not kindness, just calculation. Keanu knew then that Ias had been watching long before the incident. He hadn't stumbled into Clay Ridge. He had orchestrated every moment like a puppeteer pulling invisible strings, letting the biker confrontation serve as the opening act. But what did he want? It wasn't money. It wasn't fame. It was something far more personal. Keanu returned to Lucy's apartment that evening and finally showed her the photograph. At first, she didn't understand why it mattered. It was just a picture of a younger Keanu long before the world knew his name. But when he explained who Wes was, what he had done, and the kind of man he had become, Lucy's expression changed. "You think he's behind all of this?" she asked. "I don't think," Keanu replied. "I know. The man with the snake tattoo was just the front, someone to stir the pot, create fear. But S was behind the curtain." Lucy leaned back, her mind spinning. "But why me?" "Because you mattered to me," Keanu said. "Because he knew the only way to pull me out of hiding was to hurt someone I chose to protect." Those words hit Lucy harder than she expected, not because of what they meant for her safety, but because of what they revealed about Keanu. He hadn't just stepped in to stop a stranger from being humiliated. He had stayed because he saw something in her, a reflection of someone he had once lost, someone who had needed protection, and didn't get it in time. Keanu left Lucy's apartment late that night and went to a place few in town even knew existed, an abandoned warehouse near the train tracks, boarded up and covered in graffiti. He had noticed it earlier that week, marked with a symbol he recognized, an emblem S used years ago during their final argument, a design that represented absolute vision, but had come to symbolize control and paranoia. Inside the warehouse, the dust was thick and the air smelled like old rubber and oil. Keanu moved slowly, checking each corner until he found it. A small room in the back with a table, a chair, and dozens of photographs pinned to the wall. Photos of him. Photos of Lucy, her flower shop, the sheriff's office, even the bench, where he first sat the day he arrived in town. S had been watching everything. On the table was a single note. "You left me in the fire. Now I'll burn what matters to you." Keanu's hands clenched, not in fear, but in regret. He had tried so hard to walk away from the past, believing that doing good would erase the wrongs he had witnessed. But some ghosts don't fade. Some ghosts build empires in the silence. And now, this ghost was threatening to destroy the peace of someone who had already endured too much. Keanu left the warehouse and called Lucy. "I need you to pack a bag," he said. "We're leaving town for a few days. It's no longer safe." "Where are we going?" she asked, voice tight with nerves. "Somewhere he can't follow," he said, "and somewhere I can remember who I used to be." By midnight, they were gone, and in their absence, Clay Ridge awoke to something terrifying. The flower shop had been burned to the ground, and on the charred remains of the door, someone had carved 3 numbers. 3. 6. The countdown had just begun. Again. The reckoning. The road wound endlessly through the mountain pass, its edges dipping into thick forests that looked ancient and untouched. Tall pines brushed the clouds, and the world above felt separated from everything that had happened below. No markets, no fire, no cameras, no carved numbers. Just sky and breath, and the sound of tires rolling over cracked asphalt. Lucy sat in the passenger seat of Keanu's old black Jeep, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes heavy not just from lack of sleep, but from the weight of everything she had lost in a matter of days. Her flower shop, once a sanctuary of color and scent, was now just ash and ruin. The arson report hadn't been needed. She already knew who was responsible. It was a message, one not written in words but in destruction. S wanted her broken, not scared, broken. And still, somewhere deep beneath the grief and fear, Lucy's soul hadn't given up. She had been reduced, but not erased. Keanu didn't speak much during the drive, not because he didn't want to comfort her, but because he knew some pains needed quiet before they could begin healing. His hands stayed steady on the wheel, his eyes alert, checking the mirrors every few minutes. He had chosen this place for a reason. Nestled high above the valley was an old training lodge, once used for martial arts retreats and meditation, now forgotten and buried in snow for most of the year. It was a place he hadn't returned to in nearly 20 years. The last time he'd stood there, it had been alongside S during their final falling out. When they finally reached the lodge, it was almost dusk. The sky glowed with soft lavender and rose hues, the mountains silhouetted against the fading light. Keanu helped Lucy unload a few bags, and they moved into the wooden structure that still held the scent of incense and aged pine. The silence here wasn't empty. It was grounding. Lucy walked slowly through the rooms, her fingers brushing across dusty scrolls and faded calligraphy on the walls, words written in kanji that she didn't understand, but somehow felt. "What is this place?" she asked finally. Keanu looked around, his voice quiet. "A place I came to remember who I am. And now, a place where we prepare." Over the next few days, the world below buzzed with rumors. News of the flower shop's fire made headlines in regional papers. Theories spread online. Supporters of Lucy's story grew louder, calling for justice, for answers. Still, no arrests were made, no names given, and S, whoever he truly was now, remained invisible, always one step ahead, always waiting behind the next corner. But up in the mountains, things were changing. Lucy, though shaken, was evolving. Under Keanu's patient guidance, she began each day with breathwork, balance drills, slow body movements that at first made her feel foolish, but soon became second nature. He wasn't teaching her how to fight. He was teaching her how to anchor herself, how to move with her fear instead of against it, how to reclaim the space around her body that had once been violated. Every strike, every stance wasn't about strength. It was about memory, about telling her mind that she was not helpless. And slowly, she began to believe it. At night, they talked. Keanu told her stories from before the cameras, before the world knew his name. He told her about heartbreaks, about mistakes, about the weight of silence. He told her how S had once been like a brother, and how letting him go had felt like an amputation. Lucy listened, absorbing every word, not because it made her feel safer, but because it made Keanu real. Not an actor, not a myth, but a man who had chosen again and again to be kind in a world that rarely rewarded it. On the fourth morning, they awoke to footprints in the snow. Only one set. Fresh. Deep. They led up to the porch, stopped at the front door, and disappeared. Keanu checked the perimeter but found no other signs. No cameras, no messages, no fire. This time. But the silence was heavier than before. He knew what it meant. Essie was here. Not through proxies. Not through puppets. Had come himself, ready for the final act. That evening, Keanu sent Lucy down the mountain with a local ranger he trusted. She resisted at first, insisting she stay, but he looked her in the eyes and said something that stayed with her forever. "This is my past, Lucy, and I can't let it touch your future." She didn't argue after that. Keanu remained behind. The lodge was still. The wind howled low through the pines. He changed into a simple black uniform, tied a band around his wrist, the same band S had once given him years ago in friendship, and waited. And then, just as the moon reached its highest point, S stepped from the shadows. He looked older, leaner, colder. His hair pulled back, his expression carved from stone, but his eyes, those eyes still burned with that same hunger. Not for revenge, but for validation. "You always walk into other people's stories," S said as he entered the lodge. "But you never let them into yours." Keanu didn't rise from where he sat. "You turned your back on the path, not me." "No," S said. "I chose truth. You chose theater. I chose peace. You chose cowardice." The air between them cracked like dry ice. And then they fought. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was raw, real. Two men who had once trained together, now mirroring each other's movements with deadly familiarity. Each strike was memory. Each block was betrayal. They moved through the lodge like ghosts trying to rewrite history. Wood cracked, sweat dripped, breath heaved. But Keanu never lost focus. And when the final moment came, he didn't strike down with rage. He disarmed him, then embraced him. "I forgive you," he whispered, and S broke. For the first time, S cried. He collapsed in Keanu's arms, not as an enemy, but as a man who had lost everything trying to prove he was worthy. When the authorities arrived, called by Lucy and the ranger, Keanu handed S over without shame or pride, just sorrow. Back in Clay Ridge, the town rebuilt what had been lost. Volunteers helped Lucy reopen her flower shop in a new space donated by the community. People who once stayed silent now spoke up. Change, slow and imperfect, began to bloom. And when Keanu visited the new shop weeks later, he didn't come as a savior, he came as a friend. Lucy handed him a sunflower, freshly trimmed, and looked at him with peace in her eyes. "You didn't just save me," she said. "You reminded me. I was worth saving." Keanu smiled and replied, "So did you." And in that small, quiet moment, with no cameras, no crowds, no scripts, he turned to walk away. Not as a hero, but as a man who still chose to stand between darkness and light every single time it called.